So, thank you so much everybody for your endurance. It's really impressive how long you all stay here and how motivated you seem to be. It's different in Germany, so I really like that. It's great. And I will show you a more or less brief introduction to Lead Group, and then afterwards I have still time if there are questions or so, if you want to, also let me speak about different things or so, but of course anyone can leave. I mean, you can leave anytime, in any case, but I guess this is the last formal part, and then afterwards we can just see how it goes. Okay, so one thing about Lead Group is that it really is a beta software. I mean, the whole Lead-DBS pipeline has bugs because we're just such a small team, and we add features and sometimes things break. But especially Lead Group is not yet perfect and everything works fine. So we will probably even see errors right now in my demonstration. The reason for that is that we usually just add a function when we need it for a paper, and then we don't use it for 2 years, and at some point you click on it again and it's broken. So you just need to know that it's really academic software with all the benefits. It's free and everything and open, but also downsides, which is bugs actually. And I plan to do this interactively. So I have basically a talk with slides which basically just show what we can do and go through some functions, and some may even not work right now, and we have to fix them then. Write us emails if functions don't work, or post it on the website, because usually they are pretty easy to fix. It's just some small thing that changed and we didn't notice. And usually we're quick in helping with broken pipelines as well. And the idea, so this is the main GUI, and as you can see, it's actually pretty. It's also not very intuitive, right? So it has so many functions and so on, and buttons, and it's really hard to get your way around through this. But these slides here, they are also inside the manual. If you go to the website, these are exactly on there, and you can look at them. And what has changed since the slides is actually this part, and this is now not in Lead Group anymore, but inside this Lead Group connector. Right? So we have basically the main set of analyses. We upload indications here. We can add clinical variables or whatever variables. And then we have some more general settings. And then we can calculate statistics. All right. So I will basically go through the talk, but also go through Lead Group. And what I have here is, so I just type Lead Group, and it will open this new analysis. And I have 3 subjects here, sub 1, 2, and 3, that we can use to make a mock-up analysis. The first thing to do is to create a new folder just like my Lead Group analysis, right? So it's just a blank folder, nothing inside. You can choose this folder to store the stats in here, right? So I will just choose this folder, and now Lead Group will be set to this folder and store everything inside here. And now inside here we have one file only which stores all the information about the model. Okay. And then we can, first thing is to add patients. So we add patients, and these are 3 patients that we processed with Lead-DBS before. Okay. And we add them here, and now you see a list of patients. First thing we can do is just to visualize them, right? We select all of them and we press visualize 3D, and then we can just have a group figure of these electrodes, right? So that's maybe a first function, and actually 2 of them are not well placed, so it's not a good example, and it's really true, unfortunately, so it's not just a bug. Okay, so and then we can say, zoom in and everything, and that's great. So far, so good. And this describes it, right? Same thing here. We add the patients. We have 4 patients here, and then what we do in this tutorial is to add two different groups, so that we can do that as well. We can say this third patient is group number 2, right? We just click on the plus. Now we have two groups, and we can give these groups colors. So a standard example would be to have responders and non-responders, right, or something like that. Or patients with VAM stimulation, patients with GPI stimulation also. And so it basically just gives them two groups, and we can now give the groups colors. So we say group first thing will have this color, the second group will have this color, and if we now visualize them again, they will have these colors, right? So we can differentiate already. Maybe responders are somewhere different than non-responders. So that's already a small analysis just to visually show maybe two groups. And it can sometimes be really informative, I think. So in this case, by accident, we chose the two that are outside the STM in a different group than the one that is inside the STM. Okay. I might just use these slides first of all because anyone can download them, so you can recap it, but also to remind myself of which functions we have, because there are quite many. Okay, so that's the same thing. We define group colors, and so the atlas that we want to show is up here, and then it's visualized 3D. So that's up here. So my MATLAB seems a bit broken. Okay. Now we can, as in the main GUI, we can just use a different atlas. So that's nothing special. And we have two groups here as well. Then another thing that we've shown a few times, maybe imagine you have now 30 patients and you have two of them that are really outside and you don't believe the results and you think, I would like to check these two patients again. You can select one of them and say open them in Lead-DBS again, right? And we've done this a few times before, but now we can really look at that patient again and maybe make sure everything is correct, normalization is correct, and so on. The nice thing is that if we change the results here, it will automatically be updated here. Right? You don't have to click anything, it will instantaneously be updated. So we can really use Lead Group also to organize the data better and to make sure everything is correct and open it again and check, and we don't have to set up a new analysis. Sometimes this can also be a problem. Sometimes you want the group analysis to be fixed and not change anymore. Maybe we have two, we have the same patients included into two group analyses, and we want one to be frozen and not change if we change the single patients, and there's a button for that that's up here. So we can say detach from single patient data, and then it asks you, are you sure? And if we are sure, then it's fixed now. So now it's basically, this is independent and we can give it to colleagues and so on. So it's a portable file. It doesn't use the patient-specific data anymore. So usually what's a good idea to do is to make just a copy of this small folder and say this is the detached one, and then only detach one of the two, right? But because it's not easy to actually reverse this, so once it's detached, somehow. Okay, but all the rest will still work. We have the detached analysis now. And then, exactly, we did that. Open them in Lead Group again, everything is fine. Okay, so now another thing to visualize them, we said here, so exactly, this visualize 2D button. And to be honest, I'm anxious that this will not work, so don't be surprised if it won't. But the idea here is, and if you need it, it is actually working. So the idea here is to create these two-dimensional slices where you see all of the contacts, and it will basically create one for each contact pair. It's also not often so important. Okay, so this doesn't work currently, but we'll fix it. Now we know. Now we just need time. But one other thing that is nice is that you can enter the stimulation parameters of these patients directly here in Lead Group, and it will be exactly the same thing that you've seen before, right? So we have these stimulations. So we say maybe let's put 2 milliamps on this contact, and then so we say just next patient, and we see up here now it's subject 2 has a different electrode, so it's a 4 electronic lead, so we maybe say 2 volts for this patient, and then subject 3 we take 3 volts, and we save that, and now we have the stimulation parameters saved inside here. Good. So that's that. That's also fine. Next patient and save. And group colors. Okay. Alright. So now one thing that we can add is to highlight the active contacts. Right? So we want to visualize the electrodes, but we want to see which ones were the active contacts. And now we see that these are highlighted in red. Right? So that's already helpful to for some, I don't know, visualization purposes. That's one other thing. That's fine. And then what's next? Okay, here we see active contacts are red. And this should also work in 2-dimensional view, which is apparently broken. And in the 2-dimensional view, it can also be helpful to say, do we even want to show the passive contacts? Maybe we just want to show the active contacts, or we only want to show the passive contacts. Rather rare, but sometimes we just want to show the active contacts and highlight them or not, and then visualize it in 2D. Usually that should work. Now, what does work, I hope, is actually to, instead of show the electrodes in 3D, show point clouds. And here we have the same functionality. So we can say, show us all passive and active contacts, and also highlight the active contacts. And then instead of showing electrodes, it will now show just a point cloud. And sometimes this is more informative because the electrodes look really big and they obstruct the view. And sometimes we maybe just want to show a point cloud of what we have. And, maybe let's zoom in here. So sorry. Right, so to make pictures like that, if you have quite, if you have some, 100 electrodes, it makes much more sense to just show point clouds, and sometimes it only just makes sense to only show the active contacts, right? Because that's actually where in the brain you did stimulate. Okay, and you can also see that the group colors also work in these point clouds. So we have different colors for these and these. So if you imagine 50 patients of responders and 50 of non-responders, and you just plot it and you really get a good separation between the colors, this could already be really nice just to show. Okay. Interrupt me in case of questions, right? So here we see group 2, group 1, and the active contacts highlighted. Okay. So now maybe the more important part, and that's where it gets a little bit complicated, but we can now use Lead group to calculate VTAs automatically for all patients. Right? Because you can imagine if you have 100 patients, it's really hard to click through every patient, open the VTA viewer and create VTAs, so it's a tedious process. But here we can basically use the stimulation parameters and everything, and use the atlas we want to use. And say for now we don't calculate connectivity at all, but we just do that. And then you say prepare DBS stats. And that means it will basically open each patient and in the background create VTAs. And these will then all be stored, and you can then use them to calculate stats. It doesn't only do VTAs, but it also gives you the possibility to calculate overlaps between the VTA and subcortical regions defined by this atlas. And then if you would use connectivity, it will also give you fiber counts to specific regions. Okay. I won't do that here because it will take too long, but this
and the output is this table?
The output is a table. Yeah. Yeah. So then you would have, for each patient connectivity to each region. So it's sometimes really helpful for stats. More easy maybe than what we've done before. It only works for fiber tracking, not for functional connectivity currently. But that, right? So, yes. Okay. So we can do that. And maybe we can in parallel, so here it's still up here, the prepare stats button.
One quick question.
Yeah.
Can you run multiple instances for each patient with different contact configurations?
No, but you could easily make a group file and just add the patient multiple times. And then do it like that. You mean in terms of monopolar reviews and so on?
Or bipolar configuration?
Yeah, not really. So I know that Till Dembeck, who does a lot on monopolar reviews, has good scripts. So you could shoot him an email, because he has these scripts where he has, I think, 100 simulation parameters in each patient and then does things with it. But in here it's not really possible. One other limitation here is that I think, at least for most functions, it only works for bilateral DBS electrodes. So we have big problems with unilateral or more than 2 electrodes. And I think from some functions it will also only work for the 4 contact leads, and not the 8 contact leads. The reason is really that there is so much parameter freedom if you allow everything that it gets really complex, also from the GUI perspective. And we in the beginning thought 95% will be 2 electrodes and so on. So for everything else you basically need to script a bit yourself, and it's not so complicated usually. So maybe to show you in parallel an important thing, we are now currently creating VTAs. And I opened the first.
So, if you were to modify the script, the script subroutine that is currently being used is accessible where to modify it?
Sorry? It's not really about modifying. I think you would rather really have to create your own scripts.
Okay.
I mean, for example, if you have VTAs only for left.
We have lots of unilateral implants.
And then you can, for example, use SPM or something to calculate overlap between the VTAs and SDN, but rather do it yourself somehow in MATLAB. So it's really not the ready-made solution for every problem. Okay. So here, first subject I opened, and we have the simulations folder. You remember that? And what Lead Group now added is a folder called GS for group stimulation, _ and then some ID. Right? And this ID is actually the ID of our group analysis. So once you start a Lead Group analysis, it will create such an ID automatically. And that's why that's basically the identifier of the Lead Group. So there's only one stimulation of this Lead Group file that's inside here, and we will use that actually. Oh no, okay, sorry. So we detach the data. Remember, we pressed this detach button. So that's why Lead Group now doesn't use the patient folder, but inside of the group analysis creates a small folder with the subject one. In here, it's actually our new stimulation. Also has the date of today, so it makes more sense, 2018. And here it already created the right VTA, right? So it will now have all the files that we need inside of this folder, and don't touch the original analysis. So you could imagine that you have maybe in total 30 patients, but you have 15 that are enrolled in study number 1, where you have the first Lead Group file. Then you have maybe 20 overlapping patients in the second Lead Group file. then both of these files will have a unique ID. In this case, it's this 2018-09 ID, and that's how the group will always, so each analysis will always know, okay, this is my simulation. And it will also not bother with the individual simulations that you make. So that's sometimes crucial to know if you want to script things yourself or so, but these belong to that group file. I'm just realizing this will probably take too long because it's still at subject number 1. But maybe we can continue with the slides a bit, and I can then maybe recap some of it. So what we did is we clicked Prepare Stats, and after that we have the SDN and so the distal components in here, right? So we could use this as to correlate it with different metrics. And we have the connectivity, so if we use the connectivity as well, we would have all the files of the pacillation. So this is again the brain pacillation in here now. We could, for example, say supplementary motor area file. And now the first thing we can do is to make a group comparison between the responders and the non-responders. And it will then create a 2-sample t-test. So in this case, comparing the overlap between the VTA and the STN, and the overlap, so the fiber counts to the supplementary motor cortex between the first group and the second group. Okay, so if you have 10 responders, 10 non-responders, easy thing, you just make a two sample t-test of overlap between STN, and you maybe get a significant result. Okay, and then what's more, this generate target report is also a pretty nice function which will show you for each patient, it generates a table for each patient which contact is inside the SDN or outside the SDN. So this will look like this. So here you see for subject number 1, these 4 electrodes are not inside the SDN, but these 2 are, these are, and so on. And in red it will highlight the active contacts. This is mock-up data, so they always have K1 as the active contact, but you will be able to see which of the active contacts are inside the SDN easily. And similar to what Andreas has shown before in PACER, you will also get a distance to the closest SDN voxel. Right, so basically the inside and outside is a bit arbitrary, and I think here we set a threshold of 1 millimeter, so everything below 1 millimeter distance would be inside, and this one is outside. Right? So it's similar, but only one metric where we calculate the distance between the center of the electrode and the center of the nearest SDN voxel. Okay, so this is a handy function. You know, if you want to report in your paper, 90% of our active contacts were inside the SDN, and the subjects 3, 5, and 10 were not, and that's why we excluded them. So then this is a really cool function just to check which ones are inside or outside. Then the next thing, and that's crucial, is to add variables here. So you can press the plus button, and then you can enter, for example, UPDR's improvement or whatever metric you want to enter, and they will be stored inside of the analysis. Yeah. So UPDR's improvement now is inside of this list, right? So you can select it and do things with it. And if we go back, we can also add another variable and do something like beta power that we recorded, so it can be a different variable. And here we chose one variable per contact pair. So there's one per patient, one per hemisphere, one per contact, and one per contact pair. And contact pair is especially for local field potentials, of course, because we often record bipolar V, so we have, you know, the the bipolar recording between K1 and 2, K2 and 3, and so on. And we can enter, these are fake values, but we can enter beta power or whatever we measured. Okay. So in this case, we have two variables now. One is UPDS improvement, is 1 per brain, 1 per patient. Beta power is 1 per contact pair. And what we can then click is the correlation between the regressor and the volume intersections, which is again the VTA SDN overlap. Right? So we can now, instead of making a group comparison, we can now plot a correlation between how much SDN is stimulated and how much UPDS improvement we have. And remember, all of this is only possible once we click the Prepare Stats button, and it's really not intuitive, I know that. It's terrible software design, to be honest, but it's also not so easy to make it more intuitive. I've asked many people about suggestions, but so you basically have to calculate the stats once based on the atlas you choose, and then you get all this stuff here. I think that's already the core functionality here. Let's see what else we have. Okay, so that's also nice, potentially nice. So, yeah.
I mean, the regressors here are in the end then predicted values, and we always use like the volume of intersection as the predictor. I mean,
Yes.
there's also a response in this predictor as to the explaining variable.
Yeah, so the regressor is the wrong name if you mean that. We have
No,
actually
I
changed
just
the
thinking, I can edit one, but I cannot edit the other. Do you see any chance that I could edit something else as explanatory variables? For example, when I don't want the volume, but I just want the distance to the center of gravity of the SDN.
Yes.
Explanatory variable.
You could do that easily.
Yeah, I can change
but,
it.
but no, in here no. So maybe it's a good idea, right, to add it. But yeah. So I think at some point we have to redesign the whole tool and make it better, more fluid tool. But for now it basically allows all the analyses we have used in our papers, or most of them. So not everything that you can think about has a button. But what this here is, so map regressor, and regressor, as I said, is the wrong name. We now call it variable in updated version. So it's not always a regressor, and it was just what I called it first. But map these variables to coordinates would mean that nothing else but to put the UPDS improvement into space, right? So plot it into the anatomical space. And it will create a nifty file that covers this region, and it only makes sense with, you know, 100 or more than 4 patients, maybe 20 patients at least, where you then can plot where you have more improvement and where you have less improvement. And similarly, you can also map them to the VTAs, which would then create, you know, color each VTA in the regressor color, you know, value, and then create a T-map and so on. So we've covered this in the beginning. Remember that we can create these heat maps to basically map improvement or whatever to VTAs. And for this map regressor to coordinates, I have one more suggestion. On the website, we have like a more tutorial or easy to understand concept paper about this. And it's in help support knowledge base, and then we have something Lead-DBS methods and this subcortical electrophysiology mapping, which is nothing else than that, but it's actually just putting things like beta power or whatever to anatomical space. And there's one example, but also some other papers to look at what we've done with it. So the first was basically, so this is the concept. So we localize the leads. These are the postoperative CTs. We have them all in MRI space. And then we have beta power recorded between each contact pair. And we just map these values into space and interpolate across. So it's nothing fancy, but it's ready-made available. And we have now, quite some papers that use this. Also, Shinji Gang basically used it and presented it yesterday as well. To use these methods to have, some, and I think there's here blog post that goes through the papers, through the paper a bit, and it's very easy to understand. So it basically has this, and then we have these targets, and then we map the beta power here and so on. So this is something to bear in mind if you're interested in these types of analyses. And let's see how far we are. The process done sounds good. Okay. Right, so now we have, as you can see, we have for each patient we have mapped the VTA, right? Everything. Now we can try it, and I hope it works. So we cannot do a two-sample t-test here, right? You probably agree it's not enough samples, but what we can try to do is a correlation, and we add a fake variable here, which would be, let's call it again, here's improvement. Here we can say 1 per patient, 1 per hemisphere, and so on, but we stay 1 per patient for now. And let's say the first patients did not do well, because they're outside, we know that, and 0.1, but the maybe third one did well. 80% improvement. Incredible. And okay, let's hope this works. Now we have prepared the stats, right? Remember, we back-click them. And now you can see that the SDN is shown here, and fiber counts actually should not be shown because we did not calculate that. But we now can say SDN overlap, does it correlate between variable and VTA intersection, and we have a correlation of 1. It's awesome. I don't know why it's 1, but it is, of course, it's only 3 points, right? So we have 2 that did poorly. So this one actually had some overlap with the SDN. So this one only few, but then this one a bit more. And once I press that, and that's important, now you also in MATLAB have, well, let me check again. I think there's, now you get the raw data here, I think. Yes, so this stats variable just appeared, and you can use that and export it to Excel or whatever and do whatever you want with it. So, you of course can also extract it from Lead Group, but even more important, you can use your own plotting tool or whatever to do this. And what we have inside stats is the core clinical, which is just the values we entered before, but then we also have the volume intersection correlations, and we have values that are actually the both would be the VTA intersections for the 3 subjects in cubic millimeters for both sides, for left, for right. And both n left and right means actually normalized by the VTA volume, so it's basically how much percent of the SDN was covered. Okay. You could, by that means, just export the data and use whatever pipeline you want to put. Okay, let's see, is there more questions so far? Okay, that was it. So that's what I expected. And so a few more thoughts. So if we do this, the map regresses to coordinates. What it would do, if we have a regressor variable with only 1 per patient, and we have active contacts in here, so we have the stimulation parameters on here, then it would map these to only the active contact of both hemispheres, right? if we have two, so one for each patient, something like one for each hemisphere, so hemibody scores, it would map always the, the according one to the according site. If we have one for each contact, of course, it would map them to each contact. Okay, so it depends a bit. So your analysis needs to make sense somehow. So you have to, for example, if you have UPDS improvement, you should also have active contacts here. So the stimulation parameters should be there. If not, it won't know where to map those UPDS improvements. And yeah, as said, treat this with some, so bear with it a bit. It's really a work in progress, and let us know if there are problems, and we try to help. Okay. Then once more, thank you so much, everybody. Especially great thanks to Friederike and Ningfei, who flew here with me and have organized and did a great job in assisting and also giving great talks. And of course, Frank Kettel and Andres Hursch, who came, was really great. And to all of you, this has really been a great experience for us. Maybe if you have time still for a really short feedback round, that would really help us to organize the next workshop. Only if you want to, whoever needs to leave can leave, but maybe really quick, just say a few words. You can start again. What you like, or is there some idea how we can improve it next time? Or